Happy Wednesday, everybody. So these are my budget lists containing 0 rares, as well as the upgrades for Bloomborough. And what I wanted to do here was kind of, let people who have a limited amount of wildcards be able to still get in on the experience of the new set. And so what this means is that some of these cards I have not play tested and may not actually be the perfect fit, right? So this is a little bit of an exploration, but I've done my best to try to make them at least functional decks. And so to start things off here, a couple of months ago, what I did is I did my budget decks for Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and tried to keep it into a space that I thought was going to rotate well once rotation happened in August. And so we're going to cover the 4 decks that I covered in Outlaws of Thunder Junction and kind of some of the replacements that I think slot into the deck well. And so Gruul Prowess, we're trying to play a bunch of aggressive 1-drops that then synergize off of combat tricks. So we've got like the Heartfire Hero, which has Valiant. Whenever it gets targeted, gets a +1/+1 counter, and then when it dies, it deals its damage equal to its power to your opponent. So it's kind of like the 1-drop Goblin that is in the Rakdos aggro decks as well, right? So I think there's a Rakdos aggro space that could actually be okay too. And then we've got Might of the Meek, which is largely the replacement for the Ancestral Anger that rotated out. And this giving you the trample and draw a card is really the important part. So we're not suffering too much if we don't have a mouse. If we have a mouse, then it's like extra bonus, right? Because if your creature has prowess, it's still going to grow. We've got Monstrous Rage, which is one of the best combat tricks in red. Shock is largely replacing the Play with Fire, being able to remove a problematic blocker early on or just direct damage to face. Audacity is a way to give trample, so this and Might of the Meek is a way that we can push damage through like Boros Convoke or other small tokens. We've got 2 Snakeskin Veils to protect our threats from targeted removal, one of the weaknesses to this deck. We've got the Electrostatic Infantry. This is a card that will not see play in the non-budget upgrade, but is still a pretty good option at uncommon. And so this one, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a permanent +1/+1 counter on it, and it has trample, so it kind of fits into the general strategy. Kinra Spell Spear we do see sometimes being explored in the Gruul Prowess space, even in the non-budget builds. Picnic Runer, as long as you're able to increase its power to above 4, has double strike, and then you can also do the Stolen Goodies. A lot of times this deck is playing an ultra low land count, so you're not actually going to get to the 4-costed adventure very often. And then Aloe Alchemist is a way that we can kind of give a creature +3/+2 in trample while also still having a 3/2 trample that wears the combat tricks well, right? So still being able to get through those problematic chump blockers. And then we've got 2 Witchstalker's Frenzies for removing anything that has 5 toughness. So like your Shieldrids, I guess Adeline rotated, but there's a couple of problematic threats that have higher toughness that are outside of your shocks and potentially lightning strikes for this deck. So the other thing that I want to cover is the potential upgrades to improve upon the deck. So first up, we have the Emberheart Challenger, and this one is, I guess let's go over the lands first. Sorry. So the first, what I recommend to people who are new to Magic or have a limited amount of wild cards is to craft the lands first, because they go into the most amount of decks. And so we've got the Carplusian Forest as well as the Copperline Gorge that are, if you're in Gruul, you're going to want to be playing these cards, right? So this is called the Pain Land, and then this one is called the Fast Land because it comes into play tapped unless you have a fewer amount of lands, right? The slow lands rotated out, and those were the ones that came in untapped if you had like 3 or more. So these 2 are really safe crafts in my opinion. And then after that, I would like to go for popular rares. So these are rares that you're going to see in other archetypes as well that are not just specific to this one. And Slickshot Show Off has been absolutely wonderful in mono red prowess. I do personally think that the Gruul Prowess space is better for a strictly budget build, largely because of like the Snakeskin Veil and some of the pieces that make the mono red prowess space really successful are the rares, right? So if you do pick up the Slickshot Show Off, you can start playing around with maybe doing a mono red build because there's not too many other rares in the mono red prowess space. The other one that I think is going to see a lot of play, but I don't know for sure, is Emberheart Challenger. You get a 2/2 haste prowess that has Valiant that helps you dig for additional cards. So I think by and large, this is just going to be better than the Fugitive Codebreaker, but I'm not 100% certain yet. But it has more toughness, and the being able to disguise this and flip it up can work sometimes, but it honestly doesn't work as well as maybe it reads. So I think this is largely going to replace the Fugitive Codebreakers, and for that reason, then my specific ones, which I would only craft if I was like, all right, let's do Gruul Prowess and Gruul Prowess for sure, is the Fugitive Codebreakers and the Questing Druid. Because the Questing Druid allows you to get that additional dig and trigger the prowess off of the instant adventure, and then whenever you cast a red spell, you get a +1/+1 counter on Questing Druid, so it can actually get into a sizable threat in this archetype. Second up, I'd like to talk about Simic Cookies, and this was a deck that, so the non-budget version of this was doing very well in the best of 3 tournament scene, and I climbed with relative success in the best of 1 scene as well. It's always hard to anticipate how the meta will change. Rakdos Lizards I've been bumping into, and it is quite a spicy deck. So, hard to say if the Simic Cookies will be able to withstand such heat. But I have played this budget version, and I feel like it's pretty good for a strictly common and uncommon build. And so this one's synergized off of food tokens. So you've got Ginger Brute and Tough Cookie, which are food creatures. And the other, the Welcome to Sweet Tooth, then putting X +1/+1 counters permanently on the number of food that you control. Works nicely to have these. I thought the Baker's Bane duo worked particularly well from the Bloomburrow set, being able to create a food token when it enters the battlefield, and so just further leaning into that food synergy. Hard hitting Question is really your only like your best spot removal in green, in my opinion. Haywire Might is particularly good against the Boros Convoke matchup, which they did lose the Voldaren Epicure, but I have been bumping into Boros Convoke still a fair amount. So that one's teched in specifically to prevent the Gleeful Demolition target. Spyglass Siren gives you that map token, and all of these food tokens as well you can make into a 5/4 with Zoetic Glyph, or the Unctus's Retrofitter, animating it into a 4/4. So Case of the Filched Falcon also gives you a clue token when it enters the battlefield, and then Hollow Scavenger gives you the food token at a sorcery speed adventure, and then you can also sacrifice your food to make Hollow Scavenger hit for more damage. So this is a pretty spicy build for just uncommon, or for just commons and uncommons, but it does require a fair amount to go into its full best of 3 tournament winning state. So again, the first and safest crafts, in my opinion, are the lands. So Botanical Sanctum being the fast land, Restless Vinestalk being the man land. That works quite well against the other like control, and kind of extends if you're coming into a lot of wraths. And then the Yavmaya Coast is the Painland. So what these allow you to do really is lower the overall land count in the deck as well. Because if you have, if you're representing both colors in one card, then you don't need to run as many lands to be able to ensure that you have the right mana on turns 1, 2, and 3. So that dramatically improves the win rate of your deck to do so. So don't underestimate lands. The popular rare in the deck that does see a lot of play in other green archetypes, especially Golgari midrange, is the Sentinel of the Nameless City. So I think that one's a relatively safe craft. And then the specific rares, there are quite a few. So you've got like the Teething Wormlet, the Subterranean Schooner, and the Kitesail Larcenist, which don't see a whole lot of play in other decks. Kitesail Larcenist sees a play in like the pirate deck that has been unsuccessful, but maybe we'll eventually get the right tools for that one to really shine. And then we've got the specific mythics as well. And so this one, if I really don't encourage beginners to craft with their mythic wildcards because they are so rare. But the final upgraded version is running Agatha's Soul Cauldron as well as Surge Engine, which allows you to copy the ability of Surge Engine to give one of your creatures can't be blocked. So it helps push damage through later in the game if your opponent kind of has these answers. So something to consider if you really love the deck. The third budget list that I like to cover is Selesnya Poison, and largely what we saw before rotation was a Bant version that was looking to one-turn kill your opponent by using March of Swirling Mist. We lost March of Swirling Mist, so I think Selesnya looks like a pretty decent spot. I have played around a little bit with the Dimir Poison area too, and personally I just like the, especially for the budget build, I like the Selesnya space more. And so basically we're attacking our opponents with creatures that are have Toxic 1. So Toxic 1 gives them a poison counter. If your opponent gets to 10 or more poison counters, they lose the game. So we're pushing for damage as well as poison. So we have kind of two win conditions. Audacity helps us push damage. Tyvor's Stand is protection, as well as can help us as an instant speed green blaze. Destroy Evil is here largely to hate on enchantments in Boros Convoke. We'll see if this might need to be teched out for a different card, depending on the meta, but this is kind of one of your tech slots. Duelist of Deep Faith is a toxic creature with first strike, and then Jawbone Duelist does see play in the upgraded version, at least in some, especially with Skrelv being able to give your opponent 4 counters or 4 poison counters, because toxic stacks. So if you give a creature with toxic 1 again, it essentially has toxic 2, and then every time that this deals damage, you're giving them a poison counter. So if it has with the double strike, without any shenanigans, this is hitting for 2 toxic a turn. If you increase the toxic, then it can hit for 4 or even more. Slaughter Singer is a way to kind of push the damage as well as the poison. So toxic 2 on this one. So if you hit, it gives them 2 poison counters. And then whenever a creature with toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1. So Duelist will hit for 4 damage as well as 2 toxic. You get the idea. Annex Sentry is kind of like Brutal Cathar that rotated out, being able to remove something that's 3 or less, trying to really punish the low curves or get through problematic blockers. Flincing Raptor is another one that can give something flying, so you can give your Duelist or your Slaughter Singer flying to get over your opponent's threats. And then Viral Spawning creates a 3/3 that has Toxic, and then Corrupted is if your opponent has 3 or more poison counters. And if you have 3 or more, then this has Flashback, so it kind of gives you that like mid-range extension at uncommon, being able to play it twice if you have the poison going. So this one, I want to say with a little bit of hesitancy, the Selesnya Toxic space was found out to be the worst of the 2 options, right? So like in the upgraded version, the Bant area that was using the blue was better. Now, this is post-rotation. I know that Selesnya Toxic was a pretty good punisher for certain archetypes. Everything's going to be a little bit matchup dependent, right? But so with that in mind, always craft carefully. Again, the Brushlands, the Painland, the Fastland, the Razor Verge Thicket, and the Mythics are all relatively safe crafts. So they see play anytime that you're in Selesnya, you're going to see these lands, and then Mythics is pretty decent, being able to give you that 1/1 Toxic 1 will be included in control decks, and sometimes just even as a mana fixer. And we'll see if Mythics gets replaced, but I think largely it's going to be one of those. It's like a one of is usually included in the deck, so it's a pretty safe craft. And then as far as a popular rare goes, the Skrelv Defector Mite saw a lot of play in white in general before rotation. So I expect this one to do the same. It's going to find places where it needs to protect things from instant speed interaction, because you can give something hexproof at instant speed. Even if you don't have any mana, you can play the Phyrexian mana, which can be paid with life instead of 1 white. And so that's going to see play, I think, is pretty safe craft. And then the specific rares are the Seed Core, which really only sees play in the Toxic, because you need that Corrupted to be able to give a 1/1 creature +2/+1, which really is just for the Duelist and the Crawling Chorus. Like it's definitely a very specific rare. We also have the Bloated Contaminator. This one sees a little bit more play, but I still consider it pretty specific. The green-white or just mono-green counter space, like the brew that I showcased yesterday. Bloated Contaminator is a consideration because if you have counters, poison counters being one of them, but also +1/+1 counters, then the Proliferate works for that space as well. And then we have also got the Venerated Rot Priest, and this was the card that was combined with March of Swirling Mist to do the one-turn kill, because if you target 3 of your creatures while you have 3 Rot Priests in play, then you get like 9 poison counters on your opponent in one turn. That was the idea. Still works really well in this this space, in the green-white decks. And I'm trying to say space less often now that I'm aware of it. But Venerated Rot Priest working really well because your opponent gets a poison counter every time that it gets targeted. And Skrull's Hive is another one that's only going to see, well, I shouldn't say only, but largely only sees play in the Selesnya Poison space. So, all right, I'm going pretty slow on these, but I try to be in depth on these because I know that some people are a lot, the target audience for this is somebody who's coming into Magic, returning to Magic after a 15-year break and has no idea what's going on, right? So if if heard this before, forgive me for my slow pace. So the fourth one that I'd like to cover is Boros Convoke, and the Boros Convoke one, I've been impressed with it at the uncommon and common level, and I'm very impressed with the final build of the deck. So this one, basically going off of a board flood strategy. So we've got the Novice Inspector, which creates a clue token, Gleeful Demolition, which can blow up that clue token and turn it into 3/1/1 goblin creature tokens. We've got the Burning Sun's Fury, which doesn't see play in the upgraded one, but allows you to tap those tokens to then give 2 target creatures +2/+0 and haste until end of turn. And I think the Seasoned Wearing Guard is going to work pretty well in the Boros archetype, just because of how many tokens that we are creating from like Resolute Reinforcements, Lethal Demolition, even the clue token off of the Novice Inspector. Pretty much makes this into a 3/2 for 1, which is going to be pretty awesome. Case of the Gateway Express has proven to be a contender up with War Leader's Call and works very well for the go wide strategy. And also, if you can attack with 3 or more creatures, then it gives all of your creatures +1/+0 and works really well with the Swarm strategy. Again, Destroy Evil just being my favorite tech card for the common, uncommon kind of slot for white. And then Imidane's Recruiter is an amazing uncommon, and being able to give all of our creatures +1/+0 and haste can really hit after going wide, as well as the adventure side. If the game does get grindy, you can do that first and then play the Imidane's Recruiter and swing in with 3/3/2s. And Halo Hopper being a kind of budget option to take advantage of the go wide space, and the Stoke the Flames being able to deal 4 damage. We did actually see this one being explored in the upgraded version for specifically matches against Domain. So not in most upgraded lists, but still a pretty good one for the budget build. And if you want to look to upgrade this one, my suggestions again are trust going on the lands first. So the Inspiring Vantage is the Boros Fastland, and the Battlefield Forge is another one that's very popular. Second one I'd like to talk about is a popular mythic that's also a land. I think Cavern of Souls is a relatively safe craft. However, again, I would encourage you to save your mythic wildcards until the very last craft. So I wouldn't do that one. But I might do this one before the specific rares just because of how many decks are running the Cavern of Souls, especially because many of the decks were tribal in Bloomburrow. So a lot of creature types like lizard aggro, mice aggro, that type of thing. So as long as everything has the same creature type, you're going to see Cavern of Souls. And it works in this one pretty well because a lot of the creature types are human. The specific rares are Warden of the Inner Sky and Sanguine Evangelist and Knight Errant of Eos, as well as War Leader's Call. So Warden of the Inner Sky, Sanguine Evangelist, and Knight Errant of Eos all saw play in mono white humans, which we'll see if there's a version that survives. I'm a little bit hesitant to say that there will be. The War Leader's Call, I haven't seen this in any other deck other than the Boros deck, but some people love the War Leader's Call. It definitely helps up against certain matchups. Sometimes we'll see the fully upgraded version deciding to just run the 4 Case of the Gateway Express and not the War Leader's Call. Sometimes we see a 4-4 split. So it really just depends on the meta and personal preference. And Mythics is a pretty safe craft. I forgot to include that one on the Inspiring Vantage and the Battlefield Forge, but we already talked about that. And then this one is one that I'm kind of curious about. This one I didn't really know what to say, if it's going to be a specific or a very popular rare. Fountain Port, any deck that has a bunch of tokens, which this deck does, Fountain Port then allows you to sacrifice those tokens to draw a card, and it might be better than Mythics. It's hard to say, but I do think that Fountain Port's going to see play in some archetype, and potentially it could be this one. So that would be my very last craft, only if you wanted to explore the Boros Convoke space. All right, and I went back and forth on whether or not I should include these, so take this with a grain of salt. These are works in progress, and but because part of the inspiration for this video was to help people who have a limited amount of wildcards still partake in the enjoyment of a new rotation and a new release, I wanted to give you some of my budget builds that I've been kind of fine-tuning. So these are not they're not final products. They're still a work in progress, and so they will not have any upgrades, at least not yet. But the first one here is mono black discard, and I think we got enough cards at common and uncommon to do like a mono black rack style deck. So back in the day, depending on how long ago you've been playing Magic, one of the archetypes that mono black had was attacking your opponent's hand, right? So if you can get your opponent to be hellbent, they're on a top deck, and then if they draw a land, and like you get to the point where they can sometimes play a threat each turn, and then you have an answer for that threat. And so we got enough discard to potentially do that strategy. So Ruthless Negotiation exiles a card from their hand, and then we can flash it back to do the same thing and draw a card. Bandit's Talent makes them discard 2 cards, and then for only 1 swamp, if they have 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. So this can be kind of one of the win conditions for the deck. And then we also have the Thoughtstalker Warlock, which allows us to basically, like a coercion, look at our opponent's hand and remove something. Or if they only have lands in hand, then they still have to discard a card. So always making them discard a card with the 2/2 Menace works pretty well. I was playing around with the idea of Invasion of Eldraine as a decent budget option. The downside with this kind of like Mind Rot kind of style card is that it's kind of rough to play against a deck that already is hellbent, right? So if you're playing up against like mono red aggro, and they've already played out all of their threats, and you're just trying to survive, you don't want to have Invasion of Eldraine in your hand. If you're playing up against Control, or a mid-range deck that really wants to have a hand, then Invasion of Eldraine's great. And you can flip it to then have a 2/2 flyer that deals 2 damage to them if they have 2 or fewer cards in hand. So you can really start doing these like damage little, attacks on your opponent's life total as a way to seal out the game. So one of the things that I have talked about was the Orsov the Orsov discard version of this, where you bring in white to be able to blink your Tithing Blades with the Nurturing Pixie and the Guardian of Ghirapur. And I think that's probably going to be the most competitive version of this deck, but the budget option isn't really there in black-white, in my opinion. But the reason why I included Tithing Blade as opposed to something like Shieldred's Edict is because if you craft it, then you have the tool if you're wanting to do the more fully upgraded list down the road, right? Because we don't really have the bounce synergies that make the Tithing Blade so that you can cast it multiple times, but you can craft it with a creature, and then it does give you that kind of like inevitability of pinging your opponent for 1 life each turn. So it fits what this deck is trying to do through the Bandit's Talent and the Invasion of Eldraine well enough. The other thing I put in here was Go for the Throat and Cut Down, as well as Bitter Triumph, because I felt like even though we have the Tithing Blade, we don't have multiple ways of playing it, and one of the ways that this deck loses is by getting absolutely steamrolled by mono red. So I thought more interaction was good. And then Deep Cavern Bat also allows us to attack their hand. Hopeless Nightmare allows us to attack their hand. This one also, Virus Beetle rotated out, but the other 1/1, there's several 1/1s that make your opponent discard a card that we could choose from. But the Hopeless Nightmare, you don't have as much of like a bargain synergies that you do in the previous version that had the rights that rotated out. So I don't know if Hopeless Nightmare is the right fit for this, but it fits into the just general attacking our opponent's resources kind of theme. So if you have any ideas of like, oh, you should totally include this card that's a common or an uncommon, I'd love to hear back from you guys. Again, this is all just to help. You know, I really don't like I try not to take the approach that like this is the best deck that has ever been, and there's no way that it can possibly be improved. So yeah, feedback is welcome. And then last but not least, I would like to give a budget option for people who would like to explore the Boros Mice archetype. So this is one that, again, is relatively new in the set. Not sure if the Boros Mice is actually going to be a highly competitive archetype, but if you want to get in on some of the synergies, a lot of it is, I think, reasonably accomplished at the common and uncommon level. So Might of the Meek that we talked about in Gruul Prowess would also see play in the Boros space, especially this is kind of largely going to be taking a... it's my take on Boros Heroic applied to mice. So Lauren's Escape being able to give something indestructible used to be that you would target the Illuminator Virtuoso, which had double strike, and then would get into this like connive into this giant threat, and this deck lost that. So but we did gain mice, which so we have to up the amount of creatures and kind of lower the amount of spells, but the mice still largely like the creature like Might of the Meek and the combat tricks because they target and trigger Valiant, right? So giving everything +1/+0, this one being able to target something as well as just be a 2/1 for 1. The Heartfire Hero, which I think also works pretty well in the Gruul Prowess space. There's that space again. Works pretty well here in the mouse deck. We've got the Demonic Ruckus, which helps us in the Prowess builds to get menace and get around our opponent's threats. And then I decided to bring in the Mouse Trapper, and I think that this one works pretty well with being able to tap our opponent's blockers. It works better with like sorcery speed buffs, which this is more of instant speed, so it's not perfect. Kind of debating on the last little bit of what should be in here. Maybe the Mouse Trapper's wrong. Maybe it would be better to just have another spell. But what I've found is when you're doing these decks that have a lot of prowess triggers, is where they fall apart is not having enough creatures and having an empty board and a bunch of monstrous rage in hand that can't hit a target. So I decided to lean away from like Felonious Rage because I felt like we needed a higher creature density, and the mice like having more mice, right? They're not necessarily just like they're not an Illuminator Virtuoso that can just be the one card on the field, right? So we kind of want to up the just general amount of mice, in my opinion. Seedglaive Mentor, being able to just come in as a Vigilance Haste that gets bigger every time that you target it. And then the Brambleguard Captain seemed like a decent option for budget. I'm not sure that it's actually going to make it into the Boros Mouse build at the end, but being able to hit this with like a Monstrous Rage and give something else the +X+0 as well works, I think, at least in theory, right? We also did get the Rockface Villages, which are at uncommon. Again, I'm not certain about how great it's going to be able to tap 2 mana to be able to give something haste, but it's at least something to kind of inspire. Hopefully it gives you some ideas of what you can do at the common and uncommon level. So if you'd like my thoughts on the Boros build for mice specifically that's upgraded, you can check out the video yesterday, and for other Bloomburrow brews as well. So I hope this video finds you well, and hope it was helpful. Hope it gives you some good ideas and gets you excited about the new set. And let me know in the comments below, again, if you have any ideas for how to improve upon these decks. I definitely want this to be, you know, a community thing, not just me telling you the best options. So with that, thanks for listening. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you next week for the first best of 1, best of 3 meta review as we get some of the early stats for Bloomburrow. So take care.